Hi, my name is David Kelsey, and this is a lecture for the Critical Thinking course. And I would like to discuss a little bit about language and meaning in this lecture. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is the idea of a statement. And a statement is a little bit different than an ordinary English sentence. A sentence is a set of words. A statement, though, is the meaning of those words. That's what we're going to say here. And we call a statement, or we call this meaning, we call it, the idea is the idea of a proposition. So a proposition is the meaning of a sentence, right? And so what we are really saying here is that, like when we have a word, like say cat, right? By cat we mean something like four-legged mammal that meows and so on, right? We're really trying to say here in this one that our sentences can have a similar type of meaning. And so the idea is that the meaning of a sentence is the sort of thought that you have behind the words that you speak, right? It's what you're trying to express in those words, right? In that sentence. So that's the idea. The first type of meaning that we're going to look at here is called literal meaning, all right? The literal meaning of a sentence is the meaning of the sentence on the face of it, right? It's the meaning of the words alone. Right? So literal meaning doesn't include, for example, something like a smirk or a grin or a giggle, right? Or any kind of context that would change the meaning at all, right? For example, if I had like a sarcastic tone about my voice, right? That wouldn't be affected, the literal meaning wouldn't be affected by that kind of tone. So literal meaning is just the meaning of the words alone, right? So for example, if I said, right now we're doing philosophy, the literal meaning of that is just, it's the case that right now we're doing philosophy, right? There's nothing more to it than that, okay? What we're going to say then, in addition to the idea of literal meaning here, is we're going to equate literal meaning to the proposition that a sentence expresses, right? And the idea is this. When I speak a sentence, when I utter a sentence, and I say those words, what I'm doing is I'm kind of expressing that meaning, right? And that it's that literal meaning, right? And expression is just kind of like, it's a little bit like it sounds, it's kind of like throwing the meaning up into the air, like tossing it out there. And then the idea is that the person that you're communicating with, they'll try to understand and parse that meaning that's out there in the air, so to speak. And so this is how communication works, right? Somebody says something, and then the meaning is kind of out there to be understood by whoever's they're communicating with, right? So expression is the idea of just sort of tossing that meaning out there, right? And we're going to, again, equate that with literal meaning. Now, the second type of meaning that we're going to connect to a sentence, to our words, is called intended meaning. Okay, so while literal meaning is meaning on the face of the words alone, it excludes context and things like this. Intended meaning includes all of those extra pieces, right? It includes the context and the smirk and the giggle and all of that. Intended meaning is like it sounds. It's what you intend to say. It's your intended thought behind your words, right? It's what you really mean, right? Now, what we're going to say is that, like the literal meaning is the proposition you express with your words, we're going to say that the intended meaning is the proposition that you assert with your words. It's what you assert, which is kind of like, assertion is kind of like declaration. It's like, stating something really is the case, right? That's what assertion is, okay? And so we have two different types of propositions here. The proposition that's being expressed by a sentence and the proposition that's being asserted by a sentence, right? So we have literal meaning on the one hand and intended on the other. So right now we have here a little example, right, of sorts. Okay, so consider that you're saying something like, I'm going to the beach right now, right? The literal meaning of that is just, it's the case that I'm going to the beach right now, right? It's just this kind of, claim about, going to the beach. Right? Now, of course, because you're not trying to be tricky about it, because you're really saying something like, oh yeah, I'm just going to head to the beach right now, that's your intended meaning as well, right? So what we say here then is that the proposition I'm expressing, right? It's the case that I'm going to the beach right now, and the proposition I'm asserting are one and the same, right? They're the same proposition. The same meaning is connecting both on the literal side and the intended, okay? Now, one of the things that comes in here, though, is that when you start to think about what a proposition is really doing, it's stating that something is the case, right? It really is the case that I'm going to the beach right now, for example. Now, because that phrase is there, it is the case that, right? We can see straight away that that claim there is going to be something that could be either true or false, right? So what we say then is that the meaning of our words, right? Not the words, but the meaning of them, right? What I mean by my words is actually something that can be true or false, right? So if it is really the case that I'm going down to the beach right now, then it'll be true that I'm going down to the beach right now. That proposition will be true, right? And of course, if I'm really not, which I'm not, then it happened to be false. So what we say then is that the propositions, the meaning of our words, those things are true and false, not the words themselves, right? Because the words really don't do anything. They just are, in a sense, they're just kind of like a vessel to express and assert our meaning. So, okay. Now, the next point that comes in is really interesting because we see that in some sentences, like when I say I'm going to the beach, and I don't really mean anything trickier than that. What I intend to say and what I literally say are the same, right? On the other hand, though, imagine I say something sarcastically, right? So imagine, for example, that I've got a really messy roommate, and the guy never picks up, right? He never takes the trash out. So I say sarcastically, oh yeah, he always takes the trash out, right? Now here, what I'm expressing, the literal meaning of my words is that he always takes the trash out, right? That's what I'm literally saying. And there's nothing more tricky about it in that sense. But what I'm intending to mean, right, my intention there isn't to say that he always does, because he never does. So what I'm actually intending to say is that he never takes the trash out, right? And so what's interesting about sarcasm is that the literal meaning, that he always takes it out, and the intended meaning that he never does, they sort of split apart. And the interesting thing about this idea is that, if you think about sarcasm, that's kind of why it's funny, right? Because in sarcasm, you don't really mean what you say, right? It's something underneath, right? And of course, if you laugh and you get the joke, right, you get the sarcasm, then it becomes funny because you understand that what's intended and what's literal are coming apart like that. Okay, well, that'll do it for today then. That's our lesson on language and meaning and sentences. I think in the end, what I want you to think about, as a philosopher, really, I want you to just maybe from this short lecture is to think about language a little differently, right? If you start to see language as a kind of tool to express your thought, right, as opposed to just trying to get the words out correctly, what you're trying to actually do is portray your thought through those words. For me, when I started to think about language like this, I actually started to become a lot clearer with my words because I started to choose them more wisely, and so that my words would actually assert what I intended to say, right? What I intended to mean. So hopefully you maybe see the value there in that. And okay, well, that'll do it for today then on this lesson on language a bit, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.